Hey everyone, today we have the opportunity to sit down with Mr. Bruce Taylor, who's a retired former IBM executive that has worked on a lot of Olympics throughout the years. And he's going to share his experiences working with the Olympics, being a part of it from a spectator point of view. But we're mainly going to focus on the 1996 Olympic Games that were in Atlanta, Georgia, because they were a big game changer. And we both are here in Atlanta, but we decided to do it virtually because he has a lot to show you, and I'm really, really excited to learn more from him. So, Bruce, can you start out by just telling us a little bit about yourself, hometown, teams, hobbies, education, just really anything?
Sure, very happy to do that. And thank you for inviting me to be with you today. Yeah, I grew up in Connecticut and I went to university in New Jersey, went to Rutgers. And it was before the era of computer science degrees. There was no such thing. But I was interviewed on campus by IBM in my senior year of college. So I joined IBM right out of university. And I spent what ended up being 32 years with IBM before I retired in 2001. Uh, in that 32 years, I spent 12 years overseas on assignments in England, Japan, and Australia. And in fact, while we were in Japan, we were there 5 years, and I was back in the US for some meetings, stopped in to see my management here, and said that the Japan folks wanted me to stay longer in Tokyo. And my manager there said, "I'm sorry, but you have to come back to work on the Olympics."
Ah,
I said, "Work on the Olympics? What does that mean?" So he said, "You need to be the application guy responsible for building, running, supporting the competition result system for the Olympics." And I had no idea what that meant, but I quickly learned.
yeah, and it was a game changer moving forward, which I've been learning a little bit about from going to the Atlanta History Museum, or Atlanta History Center as
Right,
well.
right. He said you have to join the Olympic team, come back, work on the Olympics, and you have to go to Barcelona, which was my first games. So you can learn about the games and about the technology and how we manage sports competition from a technology point of view. But there are no hotel spaces in Barcelona. So you'll have to stay on the IBM ship. I said, IBM ship? Who knew IBM had a ship? Well, normally they don't, but of course. But during the Olympics, in cities where there's limited hotel space, all of the big Olympic sponsor companies have ships that they use as hotel and for their customer hosting activities.
Very, very cool. I know at this last Olympics that we had in Paris, the surfers that were in Polynesia were able to stay on a really nice cruise ship, and I followed them on TikTok to see what that looked like, which was really cool. So, yeah, thank you for telling us about your experiences and just being on the IBM ship. I had no idea. And at 1992, that was such a big Olympics with the dream team and all of that. So can you tell us a little bit about your experience and just kind of observing that and then how you added on to that for the 96 games?
Sure. Well, in 92, I took a small team to Barcelona, and we were there at the basketball venue maybe a week before the competition or a few days before the competition. And we were talking to the venue manager about staging and supporting from a technology point of view, high level basketball. He ended our interview there saying, "You guys should come back sometime when there's a game on, because then you'd be able to sit right at the courtside and you can see exactly how we do it." So we said, "Sure, that sounds good. When should we come back?" And I looked at a couple of my team members who said they knew the schedule. So they knew the dream team was actually competing that night. So we said, would coming back tonight be too soon? And they said, no, that's no problem. So we actually sat one row behind Marv Albert right at courtside and saw the dream team play and come in and do their thing. So that was a lot of fun, even apart from the technology that we were there to observe. So that was a lot of fun.
I mean, that's a huge moment in history, just the fact that everybody always talks about the dream team. There's so many documentaries about that time, and Barcelona wouldn't be what it is today if it didn't host the Olympics. So I'm sure they have many more hotels now after that whole thing. But yeah, and that was before you could Google a schedule, right? So you all had
That's
to
right. That's
really be
exactly
on
right.
it.
Right. So that was a lot of
Okay.
fun. And we worked on, so we were there for the full 14, 15 days of the Barcelona games. And I was actually still living in Tokyo. As I mentioned, I was expecting to stay longer. So I had to go back to Tokyo and spend another few months and then move back to Atlanta to begin our Olympic journey. So although the games were in 96, the work and the team and the technology started in 92, 92, 93. So I actually had sent some folks to Lillehammer for the Winter Games in 94, which we can talk about a little bit more if you want. But we actually went to Lillehammer in order to learn more about scoring and supporting the competition. So even though it was Winter Games, there are a lot of similarities in time sports, judge sports, head-to-head sports. So the winter and the summer have corresponding groups of sports that have similar technology requirements. So that was what we did. That was fun.
Very, very nice. Yeah, so I think that's a great topic that you just were talking about is the preparation for it. You don't plan these things a year in advance or even a couple months, right? You have to go to other Olympic Games like the summer and the winter to see what people are doing, and then to help advance that to make the next one even better. I actually got to go to the Paris Paralympics this past year, and I have a friend who's working on the LA games, and he was out there just checking out what was going on with the accommodations as far as the para Olympians and adaptive sport and all that, just to see what they need to do in LA. So that was really exciting for me just to have that conversation and just to learn a little bit more about that as far as from a disability and sports standpoint.
Right. And we went back, we had folks that went back to watch and observe the Paralympics as well in 92 in Barcelona. And it's very impressive and it brings tears to your eyes. You know, it's amazing what they do. And the technology scoring aspect of supporting the Paralympics games is much more complicated. There are a lot fewer sports, fewer events, fewer disciplines, but within each sport, there are a lot of gradations of disability that result in differences in how the scores are calculated and the results are computed. So,
No, thank you so much for talking about that. A lot of times when I teach the international sport management class, or pretty much any class that we talk about the Olympics, I say, when did the Paralympics happen? And usually maybe one person knows that they happen right after the Olympics. So, when you bid for the Olympic Games to have it in your city, whether it's winter or summer, you will have the Paralympics that come a few weeks afterwards. So it's really important to make sure that you're treating all the athletes, Olympics and Olympians and Paralympians equally.
that's true, but it wasn't always true. The Paralympics, until maybe just before Barcelona, maybe even as recently as in Albertville in 88, for example, they may have been staged totally separately and not necessarily with the same organizing committee. Now the organizing committee, as you say, commits to supporting both the games and then a couple of weeks later the Paralympics. So
Yeah, and so hopefully, moving forward in LA 2028, when we see that, it'll be really interesting to see how LA transforms the city for the Paralympics. Because, from my understanding, here in the United States, we have a better understanding of the Special Olympics, which is those with intellectual
right,
disabilities. So it's kind of understanding more what Paralympics, what adaptive sport is. So maybe we'll see a huge increase in participation with that going on.
right.
So the main reason we're here today is to talk about your experiences. And I know you said you worked on uh Lillehammer, and then also too we're going to be talking about Atlanta. But can you tell us a little bit about working with the Winter Olympics and then how both working with the previous Summer Olympics and Winter Olympics helped you with the 1996 games? And then we could dive into the 1996 games a little bit more after that.
Yes, sure. And what I could do is show you a couple of slides that have a little bit of the history of the games, if this is a good time to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love that.
Let's see if I can find the right thing here. So this set of slides goes through 56 years of technology of the games. And by technology, I don't mean just computer bits and bytes, but I mean all of the technology that directly affects the athletes as well, and the technology of staging the sports. So you can stop me and we can go in a different direction. But what this shows is from Tokyo in 64 through the Atlanta Games and then Tokyo 2020. The games then were, of course, delayed because of COVID and were not held until July of 21.
I would love, yeah, taking us from Tokyo to Tokyo and just seeing how we've come full circle.
Okay, yeah, I think that's what this tries to do, and it shows a little bit more about the technology as well. The Tokyo 64 games from October 10th to 24th in 1964 kind of provided an opportunity for Japan to demonstrate its progress after the horrors of war and years of U.S. occupation. The second Monday in October to this day is still celebrated as National Health and Sports Day in Japan in honor of the opening ceremony that was held October 10th, 1964. The 64 Tokyo Games were the first games to be held in Asia. And the carrier of the flame, Yoshinori Sakai, was chosen because he was born on August 6, 1945, the day that the atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, in homage to the victims and as a call for world peace. And we'll hear more about subsequent calls for world peace in subsequent games. An Olympiad, the term, is a period of 4 years associated with the Olympic Games of the ancient Greeks. So the first Olympiad began in the summer of 776 BC and lasted until the summer of 772. So it is a 4-year period that includes the Summer Games. So measured that way, 2020 was actually the 699th Olympiad. However, one of the terms you hear a lot in the Olympics these days is the Olympiad of the modern era, which began January 1st, 1896. And the modern Olympiads refer to that 4-year period beginning in January. And the Games in Athens in 1896 were the first Olympiad of the modern era. So in Tokyo in 64, the technology was evolving, not just the computer technology, which was relatively rudimentary in 64, but things as elementary as the running track that the athletes ran on. It was the last Olympics where dirt, cinder, rocky gravel kind of running tracks were used. Artificial surfaces have been used in some other amateur athletics, but not at the Olympic level. It's also the last games where timing was done with handheld stopwatches, and swimming was judged by visually deciding who would touch the end of the pool first. It's also the first games where competitors' times were shown live on TV broadcast via satellite. So that's pretty early in 64. It was also the first games that had fiberglass for the pole vaulting. Prior to that, they were using bamboo or wood or steel, but fiberglass, with its flexibility, resilience, actually generated a significant increase in the results of the pole vaulting competition. And also because it was at Asian Games, the first sport pictograms to ever be used in the Olympics were deployed in design form, deployed in the Tokyo Games. Any of us who've been to the Olympics ever since, very familiar with sport pictograms that are on the signage for the venues, etc. But they were developed for Tokyo because of the language barriers that would otherwise have, impeded communication. The scale of the games, there were 93 National Olympic Committees that sent teams, 5,000 athletes, 153 events. And we'll talk a little bit more if you want about the hierarchy of sports, disciplines, and events. These are actually medal awarding events, including Bob Hayes, who set a world record for the 100-meter dash at 10.0 seconds in this games in Tokyo. Before I show a short video of Bob Hayes' result, Bob Hayes is bib number 702 on the left-hand side. And this was actually in one of the qualifying rounds, and he was in lane 3. But notice the bottom right, lane 1, the ground is all turned up, and you can see kicking up from the athlete's shoes the cinders. So Bob Hayes qualified for lane 1 in the actual final, and which meant that he got the opportunity to run where it was all torn up. So that's one thing to notice. The other thing to notice is the timing system. On the left-hand side, you can see a column of 24 suited, white-hatted Seiko gentlemen, each of them holding very high resolution, high quality stopwatch. So in 64, the competition was measured, the results were computed based on visually watching the runners hit the stop line, hit the finish line. So there were 3 guys assigned to look at lane 1, 3 for lane 2, 3 for lane 3, etc. And they each recorded what they thought was the guy's arrival time. And then the official results were calculated as the average of those scores that they computed. So this is the last time for cinders, and also the last time for purely, stopwatch driven timing. So
I had no idea that image is so powerful with everybody lined up with their stopwatches.
yeah, it's amazing. I didn't actually even notice that at first, but
Very nice, very nice. Just making sure there's no sound to this video, correct?
sorry,
There's no sound to this video, correct?
there should be sound. You're not hearing it?
Oh, I'm not hearing sound. Yeah. That's why I keep talking.
Ah, there should be. I wonder if I didn't, when I shared it, I suppose there was a checkbox, but I thought I had already checked it. What do you want to do? I probably have to reshare it.
Okay, that's fine.
Share sound. How about that?
Okay.
That will probably do it. Do you want me to rewind the video or just proceed?
You could rewind the video if you want to.
Okay. We'll see if you hear the sound this time.
One in convincing style.
I hear it.
So some of you may recognize this face in the crowd at the 64 Olympics where Bob Hayes set the world record. This is Jesse Owens. And Jesse Owens, who of course made his fame at the Olympics in 1936, was actually writing a column for the Newark Star-Ledger during the 64 games, basically telling what he thought about the competition, but also relating some of his experience from the 36 games during his, the columns that he wrote for the Star-Ledger. And as probably most people now know, the 36 Olympics were held in a very tense, politically charged atmosphere. The Nazi Party had risen to power in 33, 2 years before Berlin was awarded the Games by the IOC. And its racist policies led to international debate about a boycott of the Games that lasted until a few months before the Games. Hitler saw the 36 Games as an opportunity to promote his government and ideals of racial supremacy and anti-Semitism. No German Jews were allowed to participate, almost certainly depriving Germany of at least one more gold medal in the high jump that would probably have been won by Gretel Bergmann. And the great German-born fencer, Helene Meyer, had been forced to leave Germany in 1935 because she was Jewish. As part of the Nazi propaganda campaign, Meyer reluctantly accepted an invitation to compete for Germany, where she won a silver medal in individual women's foil. Many people today consider Meyer as kind of a tragic figure who was used not only by Nazi Germany, but in a way also by the IOC and the USOC, or AOC at the time, to avoid a boycott of the Games. And after the Olympics, Meyer returned to the US and became a 9-time champion in fencing. So Jesse Owens nearly didn't get the chance to make Olympic history because of that controversy about whether we should boycott the Games. A fierce debate raged. Amateur Athletic Union President Jeremiah Mahoney argued that participation amounted to support of the Third Reich, but he was outvoted by the American Olympic Committee, and it was headed at the time by Avery Brundage, a name that probably many people will remember, who insisted that the Games were really for the athletes and not the politicians. So, like other elite Black athletes who grew up in an unequal society, Jesse Owens considered the moral stance against Germany to be somewhat hypocritical, and he wasn't inclined to surrender the chance to shine on a global stage. He eventually expressed his desire to compete in the Games, which was a position that drew the condemnation of African American publications and the NAACP, actually. But compete he did, and from almost the get-go, Owen seized the reins as a star of the 36 Summer Olympics, coasting to a gold medal in his first event, the 100-meter dash.
Owens is ahead. Sundberg and Borsma are fighting. Ozendorf challenges Wyckoff. Metcalf comes up, but Owens wins in 10.3. Second, Metcalf America. Third, Ozendorf Holland.
So after setting the Olympic record in the 200-meter dash en route to a third gold medal, Owens put the exclamation point on his showing by running the opening leg of a record-shattering US 4x100 relay performance. He was the fourth leg. He actually started way behind when he got the baton, but he turned in what turned out to be probably the fastest ever 100-meter performance, stopwatch timed at about 8.5 seconds. And although it was largely reported that Hitler snubbed Owens for upstaging his prized Aryan athletes, in reality, he may have been responding to a request to treat the winners equally and declined to publicly congratulate anyone after the first day of competition. Other reports that the Fuhrer did salute Owens from afar, possibly influenced by the adoring reception that the athlete received from the fans, as we saw in the last video. So now we're back to Tokyo. We took the detour to see what Jesse Owens was doing in the stands, but this is in swimming. And I'm including this because I want you to see how, again, this was the last time that visual judging was used for swimming. And you can see at the end of the pool, there are 2 or 3 judges looking at each lane, trying to decide who touched first. Swimming touch pads had been introduced by Omega, were introduced at the 67 Pan Am Games, and they were actually testing them before that, but they were not allowed to be used in the Tokyo Olympics. They were used, electronic scoring for swimming was used for the first time in 68 in Mexico City. In 64, this short video just shows the results of Kathy Ferguson, who actually won the gold medal, is in the third lane. You'll see at the end of the race, the judges look over to try to decide who won. So at the 75-meter point, it's pretty much a dead heat. It's a 50-meter pool, of course. So in the last half a length, Kathy Ferguson just took off. But again, you can see the judges looking over to decide who actually won. Now we're going to zoom forward to Lillehammer in the Winter Olympics IBM was the worldwide information technology sponsor for many years, beginning in 1960 at Squaw Valley in the US. And it continued for 40 years through the Sydney 2000 games. As part of my team, the Atlanta Centennial Olympics results team, we had the opportunity to go to Barcelona and to support the Lillehammer Winter Olympic Games. Lillehammer was the first Winter Games after the summer and winter split. Until 94, there were winter and summer games in the same year. So the Winter Games in 94 were staged only 2 years after the 92 Albertville Winter Games. So that now there's a 2 year, there's either winter or summer every 2 years. I think undoubtedly that's partly because the fans want it, but also the TV broadcast companies want the thrill and the money and the celebration of an Olympic event every 2 years. The scale of the Winter Games is always smaller. There were 67 NOCs in 94, 1,700 athletes, 6 sports, 12 disciplines, 61 events. And the other thing that's key to point out about the 94 games is that they were actually held during the Bosnian War. Sarajevo was still under siege in 94. So these are the first games of the modern era played under the terms of the Olympic truce. The Olympic truce actually started at the very beginning in 776 BC, but it did not continue for the modern games from 1896 on until 94, when the IOC and the UN and the organizers agreed that the games would be played under the terms of the truce. The original intent was that the warring parties in Athens could actually go to the games, their families could come, the athletes could come, and they could spend the time at the games and go home without any fear of being caught in the middle of a war. And that, of course, is why the Olympic truce has been revived as a main feature. And of course, with all the games from now on, with all of the strife around the world, that will be a continuing feature. In the Winter Games in Lillehammer 94, the Bosnia-Herzegovina 4-man bobsled team, again, this was during the Bosnian War with bombs flying and Sarajevo under siege. But the 4-man bobsled team was actually comprised of representatives of all the warring parties, 1 Croatian, 2 Bosnians, and 1 Serbian. So it was really a game that was held celebrating the Olympic spirit at kind of the worst of times.
No, thank you so much for sharing that. And from a social issues and sports standpoint, I mean, there was so much that were packed into these games. And that's excluding, right, the Nancy Kerrigan situation with Tanya Harding.
Exactly.
And the fact that,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so there's so much going on with war, and what a lot of people don't realize during the Olympics, social issues are a huge factor in terms of what's going on, whether it's a demonstration, being a boycott, a protest, or in this case, you're talking about the Olympic truce, and also talking about the Bosnian War as well. So yeah, thank you for bringing attention to that.
There are a couple of short videos of the Lillehammer thing, which we can go through quickly if you want. Starting with the president or the king of Norway, he opened the ceremony, he opened the competition in 94, but 30 years earlier in 64, where we just were in the Tokyo Games, he was an Olympic athlete. I can't remember what sport he was in 1964. A sailor. He was an Olympic sailor. So you can see the Olympic torch being brought down the ski jump at the beginning of the opening ceremony in Lillehammer.
That's pretty cool.
And this is the king opening the games. And this is his son, the crown prince, who actually lit the cauldron. And there's Nancy Kerrigan skating for a silver only 2 weeks after Tanya Harding's Thugs did her in. So that's 2 weeks of the Winter Games in less than a minute.
Very nice. Thank you for sharing.
We don't need to see it again, though, do we?
No, I think we're good on that aspect. Okay,
we're-
so we're at Atlanta. Woo! These are my
We're in
favorite
Atlanta,
games.
yes. Yeah, at every Olympic Games, the identity of the four people, the four athletes who bring the torch to the stadium. It's been on a tour for months or all around the world, but the identity of the four athletes who will bring the torch into the stadium and one of whom will light the cauldron is always a very closely guarded secret. And that was true in Atlanta as well. One of the systems that my team built was a commentator system used by the on-air radio and TV broadcasters to make them sound smarter than they really are, probably, with a lot of the insight and the background information. So the pageantry and the symbolism of the opening ceremony was also included in our system, but we could not include the identity of who was going to light the cauldron until the very last minute. So literally minutes before it began, I was given the identity and we had to load the information into the system. So you can imagine my thrill when I discovered that the cauldron in Atlanta was going to be lit by Muhammad Ali after a handoff from Janet Evans, the swimmer.
1960 Olympic light heavyweight boxing gold medal winner. The opening of the 1996 Centennial Olympic Games of Atlanta.
I heard somebody comment that afterwards that Bob Eversole, who was then the president of sports for NBC, he had been pushing for Muhammad Ali to be the athlete to light the cauldron for probably a year or more before the games. But the local folks were really favoring Evander Holyfield, local athlete, local hero. But he apparently had ongoing competition with the organizing committee, trying to convince them that Ali was the right guy. And they basically said, but Evander Holyfield's is a local hero. And they said, yes, but Muhammad Ali is a global hero. And so they went with Muhammad Ali. And I actually read afterwards that Evander Holyfield was quoted as saying, the organizing committee got it right. Ali was the guy that needed to light the cauldron.
So they actually talk about that in the exhibit at the Atlanta History Museum, exactly what you were just talking about. And
Okay.
I love Muhammad Ali. I grew up in Kentucky, so I always say he's my favorite Kentuckian, next to Abraham Lincoln, of course, right? Like two great human beings. And they just recently named the Louisville Airport Muhammad Ali after him, and then they also
really? Okay.
Yeah, and they also have a museum up there. So I've been to the museum, definitely something to check out. And every April they have a social justice and sport conference that takes place up there where they talk about Muhammad Ali and his impact on sports from a social justice point of view, in addition to different presenters talking about their experience with social justice and showing data collection and all of that in relation to, Muhammad Ali and the trend that he set. So thanks a lot for talking about that.
There's actually a very recent documentary put together. I think it's going to be on PBS if it hasn't already. The Black and White Games in Atlanta, and it celebrates the Atlanta Games as kind of a very close brotherly partnership between Billy Payne and Andy Young. So they really feature a lot of the social aspect of staging the games in Atlanta and celebrating that and benefiting the whole community as a result.
Social impact, which we're going to get into in a second.
Yep. And the technology of it evolves. This was the first commentator system I mentioned. It was originally used in Barcelona, but this was expanded to include more of the sports for the summer games. And this is actually a touchscreen where you can see the sport tabs along the bottom and other information on the right, including information about the opening ceremony, medals, and things like that.
I saw the big green information booth when I was at the Atlanta History Center. Are you responsible for that as well? Those poor cell phones.
There was a system called Info 96 that was an IBM
That's what it
thing.
was, yeah.
Yeah, one of my colleagues actually developed that.
Very cool. I mean, this thing is huge. It's like the size, I don't even know what you would say. I mean, you could sit in there. It's almost like a big phone booth is what I would say.
Okay. Yeah, I probably haven't seen it at the History Center. I need to go look at that. We used pen-based laptops for play-by-play statistics. Again, it doesn't affect how you see the sports at home, but this, for example, was for football, for soccer. And you can see in the top left corner, there's a little quadrant where sports knowledgeable volunteers that were sitting at the side of the field or courtside, depending on what the sport was, they would mark where on the field the shot was taken from, where it went in the net, if it went in the net, etc. So we actually developed the software that did that play-by-play statistics, used frankly more by the coaches and some of the press than by the fans in the audience.
Now we have AI.
Yes, exactly. And so because this was early in the days of the internet, this was also the first place there was a surf shack, so to speak, a cyber cafe in the village for the athletes, where they could send email to their fans, and they could actually have little mini websites that they could view their fan, talk to their fans, and get kudos from their fans. It was also the first games that had an official World Wide Web website. So this is a picture from like 465 days before. So this was from like April of 95, showing the countdown. But the game's website had information about the competition. It also let you buy tickets. And so roughly a year before the games, you could start buying tickets. More than 130,000 Olympic Games tickets, valued at over $5 million, were sold through this website prior to the games, a year before. And keep in mind that that was in 95, 96. That was before Amazon began service as an online bookstore. And in their first year of business, Amazon sold about $1 million worth on their web. So $5 million worth of tickets from this website, followed later by Amazon. So again, one of the other first in the technology point of view. The website evolved during the games and showed videos from the games that showed the competition results, with about 11 million hits per day. A small number by today's standards, but at the time it was very substantial. 197 National Olympic Committees. It was the first time that all National Olympic Committees sent a sports delegation to the Games. Over 10,000 athletes, 271 events, the most sports events ever at that point, with 7 new sports and 50,000 volunteers. It's another aspect of staging the games that people may not appreciate. It always requires a huge number of volunteers who get trained for a year or more before the games to do various roles. We had over 1,000 volunteers supporting our results system. Everything from taking printed results, imagine that, printed results, to some of the press in the stands, to supporting other aspects of the competition.
Absolutely. Volunteers make these events go round and round. And I know the Atlanta Sports Council has done a terrific job of attracting so many major sporting events in this city. We're both based here in Atlanta, if you guys haven't figured it out or if you guys weren't listening earlier. But it's so cool. We're going to be hosting the World Cup next year. And I always joke that the only thing we haven't hosted the Winter Olympics, right? And I won't even put that past us at this point. Maybe we could put some snow on Stone Mountain or something. Who knows? But Atlanta's just a huge place, a mecca for attracting these big major sporting events. And it's really cool just to see this city. And, you just had that video of lighting the cauldron. I get to pass by that weekly.
Right.
And just the fact that we still have that infrastructure and I live in an Olympic city is such a big deal. So for anybody watching, specifically the students out there, get involved with the local sports council. If you want to do things like this, get involved. They always have volunteer opportunities. And everyone that volunteered for the 1996 games, they still wear their swag from it. Like, it's the coolest
Absolutely.
stuff that everybody wears. So you'll get some swag and some great memories from that.
Absolutely. I'll just go through this quickly. This is a presentation I did back in 96 describing, this is more the technology, basically the results management system that we developed. As I mentioned, in 92, I had no idea what the results management system meant. And at that time, there was no rule book. There was no, how do you stage an Olympics? How do you build a result system? So we had to actually understand the rules of every one of the sports and figure out who we needed to talk to in the international sports federations about the competition results and about how they score them. And I have a lot of side stories about that we won't take time now with. But so this system we developed for the 96 games supported 26 sports, 37 disciplines, 271 events. As I mentioned, there's kind of a hierarchy. The sports are, for example, aquatics. And aquatics has a international federation, FINA, that is responsible for staging and specifying the rules for all of the disciplines within their sport. So aquatics is a sport, diving, swimming, synchronized swimming, and water polo are disciplines within that sport. And then within each of those, within diving, there's multiple events for the various kinds of events that are held. So we had to develop the software for all of those for what turned out to be, an event that the constituents of the games, in one sense, were 60% of the human race because of TV spectators and spectators in various forms. So you can see
This is amazing graphic. Just really breaking down the sports, the disciplines, the different events, and then what you were involved with as far as sport and technology go. And that's, just looking at like that aspect of it.
right. The venues, we don't need to spend a lot of time on this, but for people that might not know, the Atlanta Games they stretched from Miami to Washington because of, for example, football, soccer, the competition, the early rounds were held all over the East Coast. And, whitewater canoeing was up in Ocoee. So the venues stretched far and wide. And then around Atlanta, there were several venues outside of the Olympic ring, outside of 285, the Stone Mountain Park for tennis and archery, the Horse Park, Wolf Creek, etc. And then within the Olympic ring, within the center, there were a lot of venues there as well. So again, we were building and supporting software systems for all of those venues. So we had systems running at the competition venues, and we also had a central system that consolidated information and delivered it to the various consuming organizations. Info 96, we talked about printed results. They still required print. I'd be interested to know whether in the Paris games, whether they actually were still printing results, but they were in 96.
That's a great question. I know that Paris was going after being one of the most sustainable games, so they probably try to take that paper aspect out. But definitely have to look that up.
Right. So you can see this chart shows a lot of the systems that were at each competition venue. The commentator system, the pen-based data entry if it was relevant, and a server that actually calculated the results, distributed them to a central system, and then from there to the World Wide Web. Now, one thing I didn't specifically point out, but it's worth noting that when we first showed Bob Hayes in 64, 10.0 seconds was the world record for the 100 meter. And when we did the flashback to Jesse Owens in 1936, you may have noticed that at that point, the world record was 10.03 seconds, with his score. So Donovan Bailey in Atlanta set a new world record and Olympic record of 9.84 seconds. And we'll see that.
This time they do get away. Now it's Donovan Bailey trying to pick up runners. Donovan Bailey is putting on a surge. Adam Bolden in the lead. Here comes Bailey. He's got it. 9.84, a world record for Donovan Bailey and a gold medal.
This is at the Georgia Dome?
Sorry?
Georgia Dome?
No, this was at the Olympic Stadium. That became Turner Field after the games.
What we saw from him earlier, and over the final 50 meters, it was Adam Bolden and Frankie Fredericks that he caught at the finish line. And clearly, unlike the women's final, Donovan Bailey of Canada is the Olympic champion. And at that time on the scoreboard clock at 9.84 holds, it is a world record as well as a gold medal. World record gold medalist, world champion a year ago, Canada's Donovan Bailey. What a proud moment. Donovan Bailey with a victory lap, proudly holding the Canadian flag. Let's take another look. Adam Bolden gets away quickly, so does Frankie Fredericks. And now this is where Bailey picks them up.
Bailey didn't even get a good start. Look at this.
Yeah, you can see Donovan Bailey in lane 6, way outside.
The legs are going hard. They're opening wide, and he's clawing them back and pushing them away. World record has gone. These three must have wondered what hit them over the last 20 meters as Bailey came through like a tornado. The white and black came through in the end by a yard. Canada take it.
Fredericks at the finish line was trying to lean, but the lean was of no avail as Donovan Bailey was clearly in front. Look at the determination, look at the action, the drive, the explosive form of Donovan Bailey racing to the finish line for Olympic glory and a world record.
Here he comes. That's the gold.
A couple things to note there. In that 100-meter final, there were 2 false starts before that world record. And so I want to show you how the false starts are detected, because I think people may wonder about that. Speakers are in the starting blocks under every athlete. So you might wonder why they have to be under every athlete. So they don't just fire a gun. They're actually loud. The starting gun basically goes off under every athlete right below their feet, so that there's no discussion about how long it takes the sound to travel. So they guarantee that all runners hear the starting gun at the same time.
Oh,
But
wow.
because many athletes jump the gun, timekeepers also have to be referees of a sort to preserve the accuracy. And scientists have measured that an average human takes 1/10 of a second to react to a stimulus, such as the starting gun. So pressure plates are in the starting blocks as well, and they measure the athlete reaction time. So as soon as the athlete moves, they sense that that's when they reacted. So the clock stops in the Olympics if an athlete starts sooner than 1/10 of a second after the signal is given, because they assume that they, quote, reacted before the gun was actually fired. It's kind of interesting. And this short video shows how the timing is done for the 100-meter. So that gives you kind of a view of how the apparent complete dead heats are resolved. This this slide talks about 984, Donovan Bailey's 984, and you can see that basically that slit vision system at the finish line is taking photos 10,000 times a second. And it basically is recording images of the arrival of each athlete's chest, because the chest is what matters. So you can see them stretching out their chest at the finish line. And you can also notice that the spacing is not even, the distance between them. So this is not a image of taken at one time. It's an image that's reconstructed based on all of these little thin 100th of a second wide slices of the arrival. And notice that the digital video is actually measuring arrival times to 1,000th of a second, which means that the official timing result was 9:835 for Donovan Bailey's world record. But the Athletics Federation at that point, I'm not sure if it's changed, only accepted times to 100th of a second. So the technology can actually resolve it to a much finer resolution than is supported by the world records.
Very nice. A lot different from our first slide that we saw with the 1964 Olympics in Tokyo and everybody clocking it with their timer. So yeah, and
Exactly.
IBM played such an important role. I mean, I saw the Olympic pins with IBM on them. I had no idea. So I mean, you all were pivotal as far as the Olympics go, and just with the technology and all that.
Yeah, the timing was actually done in Atlanta by Omega. Generally, it's the clock and watch companies that do the timing itself. So that's why that little video was about Omega, was done by Omega. In Atlanta, Swatch was the timing company. So the result system interfaced with the timing system. And here the scoreboard itself was run by Swatch, run by the timing company. So for the 200-meter, Michael Johnson's gold in the world record for the 200-meter, 1932. Again, this video, this image probably shows a better reconstruction. You can see, if you look at the bottom, first of all, you can see at the finish line, the 19.3, Michael Johnson's classic, almost leaning backward stance as he raced, and his gold shoes. But if you look at the scale at the bottom, this is 19.3, this is 19.4, a very narrow gap, because what it's showing is not movement of time, but it's showing the arrival. So, which means that between 19.3 and 19.7, nobody got there. So that it's not a spatial vision spatial image. It's a reconstruction showing time going from right to left in this case.
Great diagram.
Now we can do just a very short bit on the Tokyo Games if you want. I did this presentation originally in January 21. So
Okay.
6 months before the games that were held in Tokyo in July of 21, because of course the Tokyo Games were delayed because of the COVID pandemic. The games actually opened in July of 21. The kinetic sport pictograms we'll talk a little bit about, 3D athlete tracking, facial recognition. There were a number of firsts for technology in Tokyo in 2021. There were more NOCs signed up. I think maybe at the time of the games there were fewer because of the pandemic. Not every NOC sent a delegation. The sport pictograms, as I mentioned, were started in Tokyo in '64, the first Asian Games, as one way of actually dealing with what would otherwise have been a difficult language barrier. So the sport pictograms from '64 to 2020 evolved a lot, and this short video showed.
The 1964 Olympic Games in Tokyo were not only the first games to be held in Asia, but they were also the beginning of a design movement. Sport pictograms. The 20 sports pictograms created for the event changed wayfinding at the Games forever. Today, sports pictograms are indispensable to the success of the Olympic Games. The spirit of the original pictograms will live on at the Olympic Games Tokyo 2020. The 1964 pictograms consisted of straight lines and precise circles. Simple and beautiful, they were understandable by anyone, anywhere. The 2020 pictograms also add a new dimension by including the vibrancy and fluidity of athletes' movements. "50 pictograms for 33 sports have been developed for the Olympic Games Tokyo 2020. The new pictograms will sometimes run, sometimes jump, and appear anytime and anywhere to get your attention. Such innovation expresses the charm of each sport actively and clearly. The new pictograms will help visitors navigate the sites and enjoy the sports of the Olympic Games.
So, for example, rhythmic gymnastics shows the movement, and it shows the athletes starting, appearing, and then disappearing at the end.
Very nice.
This is the last of the technology slides. It basically shows what they call the 3DAT, athlete tracking, and it was made available to the broadcasters. I don't know how much they used it, but with AI and cameras, it's similar to what you see in watching American football, where the 10-yard lines or the not the 10-yard lines, but the ball position and you know are actually projected as if they were painted on the field. So in this case, it shows the color trails behind the athletes so that as they move into medal position, the color of the trail behind them can change. And the label above them shows how fast they're going, etc. Again, a use of the cameras, but also AI to predict the outcome. this is a this is during one of the test events a year before the technology, before the games. But it shows you on actually what's a relatively small scale what the technology operations center looks like for the games. In Atlanta, it was a bigger room than this, but there are always TVs on every wall and computers everywhere. So the Technology Operations Center is actually responsible for monitoring all of the venue operations and making sure that the results are being distributed to the consumers, to the scoreboards, to the judging, to the press. And the updated commentator system that showed more sports for the 2020 games. And again, the games, the Tokyo 2020 games, and they were called that even though they were held in 21, were actually held in July 2021.
So is IBM still as active in the Olympic movement as they were?
No, no. The IOC global partnership between IBM and IOC ended in Sydney in 2020, in 2000.
2000. Okay.
In 2000. So the 2020 games, it was a different technology company. One of the things that Atlanta did, not just because of IBM, but because the organizing committee and the IOC work, was to develop more repeatable process and documentation of how you stage the events, how you score the events, et cetera. So there is more of a rule book or owner's manual, so to speak, for staging the games now than there was before.
Okay, very nice. So thank you so much for walking us through that as far as technology goes and from Tokyo to Tokyo, right? So I'm going to finish off this interview with just really focusing on the 1996 Olympics in Atlanta. There was so much that went into it. We're both based here in Atlanta, like we talked about earlier. So can you tell me about what it was like in 1996 from a resident point of view, a spectator point of view, and it's somebody who was a part of actually working with the Olympics?
I can tell you from the viewpoint of a resident before that. I mean,
Okay.
I was working on the Olympics, as I mentioned, since '92. So my workplace was down at the Inforum building downtown. So I know that from a social and infrastructure point of view, I think we all saw the roads improve and expansion being done a lot to anticipate the crowds for the games. During the games, there was no traffic. Um, and that actually was a very interesting thing. I had access. I could drive to the venues. I could drive to my workplace at the Inforum. But during the games, a lot of the traffic had gone elsewhere. People were taking MARTA and walking. So I think from that point of view, the games actually improved the environment some, and I think with lasting impact, lasting effect for infrastructure for transportation. But I also think that, like for example, the Georgia Tech um, student housing was the Olympic Village during the games. So a lot of the development that was done for the games had lasting impact. The Atlanta the whole Atlanta Olympic downtown venues, Brown, Morehouse, a lot of them actually benefited from both being venues for competition, but also upgrades to the infrastructure to support them.
Yeah, Atlanta does a great job hosting sporting events. I've been to a lot of sporting events from different capacities. One that I went to just a few years ago, Super Bowl that they hosted here in 2019, I want to say. And it was the same thing with traffic. I was expecting a lot of traffic. It was congested in the downtown area, but it was really like, I want to say a 2 block radius where there was congestion. Outside of that, the roads were flowing. It was all going really well. And I actually stopped and I talked to a police officer because I was like, what's going on here? Like, this is not the Atlanta I'm used to. I thought it'd be way worse. And he said that they were very, very cognizant of the ingress and the egress of getting people in and out. And they had people changing lights and things like that. So Atlanta does definitely knows how to host a sporting event. So with that being said, and we talked about this before we actually got on here to record, but just as far as social, economic, environmental impact of the 1996 games, can you speak any to that? Well, I know you can, but just can you give us any examples?
Well, I think maybe the one of the biggest social impacts, as I mentioned before, was as cited in that black and white games. I think it had a tremendous, I think generally positive, not all positive, but positive impact on relations in Atlanta and the friendly environment that was kind of promoted by Billy Payne and Andy Young as the two key guys bringing the games and managing their competition, managing the games themselves. Um, Economically, I think that the infrastructure improvements are long-term beneficial impacts. But it's also worth pointing out that I'm not sure since, but certainly before Atlanta, no games had actually turned a profit, so to speak. Montreal is still living with huge debt from the games that they hosted in whatever year that was, 72, 76.
76. Yeah.
Yeah, 76. So economically, maybe the biggest thing to point out is that Atlanta didn't lose money on the games. Um, so that's maybe an important point. Environmentally, I think, as we mentioned, some of the downtown housing communities that were displaced by housing for the athletes was probably a short-term impact to some not insignificant number of people. But I think long term, the improvements in the overall both housing and other infrastructure for Atlanta is probably a beneficial aspect of the games.
Yeah, absolutely. I wasn't here in 1996. I didn't move here till 2019. And what I'm actually really impressed with, and this is the next thing I'm going to ask you about, is I like this city because it's one of the biggest cities in the South, number one. We have the infrastructure from the 1996 Olympic Games because we have 75, 85 going through here, 20, and then 285 to get around. It's just a big circle around. And then we've done a really good job with pedestrian walkways and making this a really, more or less trying to make this more of a walkable city and easy to get to different places. And that wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for 1996. So speaking of which, can you talk a little bit about maybe how MARTA factored into that? Because you said people were taking MARTA, taking public transportation, and how, that became a part of the games and how important, or if it was important.
I didn't take MARTA because I didn't need to. I was driving to my Olympic work sites, but I know that based on the traffic that wasn't on the roads, it had to be somewhere. And I think MARTA's overall rider population went up substantially during the games. And maybe that's a long-lasting impact and beneficial impact as well. I haven't seen the statistics, but I would assume that probably during the games, MARTA had a chance to show off what it could do, and that's been a long-term benefit as well, I assume.
You bring up a great point. I'm going to have to reach out to my people in MARTA and get some
Yeah.
numbers down for how many people swipe their card. Um, so I just have a couple more questions. So you talked a little bit about social impact and the positive social impact that the Olympics had on the city, but obviously we know that there was I mean, there wasn't but there was a negative social impact as well, and that was the bombing. Can you talk a little bit about the role that the 1996 Centennial Olympic Park bombing had on the Olympics?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things to recognize is that the Centennial Olympic Park bombing in one sense, had nothing to do with the organizing committee staging the games. The Centennial Olympic Park was not an Olympic venue. It was a great gathering place, and it's got long-term beneficial Olympic-related quality of life improvements for Atlanta. But during the games, it was not an Olympic venue. So during the games, when the Olympic park bombing happened, there was some press negative coverage that kind of attributed this to being a security lapse on the part of the organizers. And it's important to recognize that the Olympic Park was not a venue that was in any way the responsibility of the organizing committee. Now, the night of the bombing was the first night that I actually slept in my own bed at home. I was downtown at the Olympic venues and sleeping in a hotel nearby from the prior Saturday through Saturday. So it was the first night that I got a chance to be at home in my bed when I got a phone call about the bombing. So that was kind of a rude awakening from a short night of sleep at home in my bed. But I discovered that the next day, driving down to the venue to the venues where I needed to be was not a problem. The roads were stopped, but I had access passes and things. So I don't know that long term the bombing had any effect other than serving as a rallying point. There was a lot of discussion the next day about whether the games could go on. And Billy Payne and Andy Young were very vocal, very visible in making the case that the Olympic Games must go on. And so, in a sense, it created an opportunity for Atlanta, for all of Atlanta, to come together to say, let's continue. We don't know yet at that point who did it or why. And it was a terrible result, but we need to focus on getting back together to stage the games.
Yeah, and you bring up a great point. I think that's one of the things I love about the IOC, that no matter what, the Olympic Games will go on, except for three different times in history, right? World War One, good reason. World War
Yeah.
Two, another good reason. And then obviously with the pandemic, but that was postponed, right? 2020 to 2021. But outside of that, I think it's so important that bringing countries together, bringing all types of people together to celebrate in competition and fair play, and to really put the best of the best on a world stage. It's so important for us to see that every couple of years, and with the Summer Olympics every 4 years. And even, back in the day, we used to have the Olympic boycotts in 1980 and then 1984. And then now we've started with the independent athletes team or the refugee team. So no matter what, if your country is going through something related to civil war, or maybe that they're banned for some undisclosed reason or some disclosed reason, you could still compete under the Olympic flag. So I think that's pretty cool that we just make it possible for everyone. So I'm just going to ask you two more questions before we wrap this up. But the Americans with Disabilities Act and the 1996 Paralympics in Atlanta were closely intertwined. And we did touch a little bit on ADA, and we also talked about adaptive sport and disability in sport. So ADA had been enacted only 6 years prior to in 1990. So what are your thoughts on how Atlanta did with preparation and execution of logistics for athletes with physical disabilities?
My team didn't directly support the Paralympics, but IBM had a subcontractor that we'd worked with in Barcelona who actually did the competition results for the Paralympics. And I think that Atlanta did a good job. I think that it was one of the first cities where the Paralympics were actually supported by the same organizing committee. I don't know, I've read anecdotally that some athletes had some difficulty with transportation, but that's always an issue with sports, whether you're a disabled athlete or not. Transportation is always an issue in the early days of the games, as the organizing committee discovers and deals with the scope of what they're having to handle. So.
Yeah, we see different things in different Olympics. So with social media, you can see behind the scenes a little bit more. So I remember in Paris, some athletes were having issues getting to the right track and field entrance, and then some didn't like the accommodations, and some brought their own AC. So yeah, you did bring up a really good point with that. Okay, so this is my last question for you, and I ask everybody this question, but is there anything else you'd like to add on? You've done such a great job just outlining the sports and technology aspect, talking about your own experiences working with the Olympics, and then also to us focusing on the 1996 Olympic Games. So yeah, anything else you'd like to add on?
Well, I think the most important thing is to have fun. There were many times in the 4 years of preparing for the games when my wife would tell you I was not having fun. It was very high pressure because there's no debate about the end date when this project must be done. But I think it's very important from an attitude point of view to be positive, to have fun. And also, I used as one of my hiring criteria tolerance for ambiguity. Because if people expect everything to be cut and dried and clearly defined, then you don't leave yourself any room to learn anything new. And the tolerance for ambiguity is an important part of growing and also adapting to a changing environment that we're all living in. So I think that's my point.
Yeah, that's great advice. I think after COVID, I saw a lot of changes with the students as far as them being able to adapt pretty quickly to things. So I will say that's one of the good things about COVID. One of the positive things, that's probably the only positive thing I will say about it, is that it showed us that, hey, we have to be willing to adapt on a moment's notice, whether that's sitting at home and working or figuring out how to practice our sport and different things like that. So thank you so much for just sitting down and taking the time to talk to us. I mean, you've lived such a amazing life just with the Olympics, talking about the dream team, just giving us an outline of what IBM did, and then really walking us through the sport and technology aspect from Tokyo to Tokyo. So this was very, very enlightening, and we really appreciate you.
I'm very happy to do it and glad to have met you. And I hope all your athletes, friends, and your students enjoy learning more about it.
Yes. Oh, and before I forget, so I always like to say how I met the person I'm interviewing. So, um, Bruce, I have actually never met him in person. This is the first time we're getting on a video call together. But I met him through one of our mutual friends who works at the U.S. State Department in sports diplomacy. So that's a reminder that your network is your net worth. And that's also a reminder that everybody you meet in sports, it's a very, very small world, and you will know somebody that knows someone. So just keep in mind that, make sure that you're making really good connections, that you're staying in touch with people. And that's pretty much it from my end.
Okay, thank you very much. I enjoyed it. It was fun.
Yes, yes.
Bye bye.